Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the ISSA webinar for May 21st, 2026, the AI agents you didn't know you had. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Roxanne Peruz, and I'm with the ISSA International Organization, and I will be your facilitator for today. So let's get started. First, I would like to introduce ISSA for those who are unfamiliar. ISSA is a nonprofit professional association focused on information security and cybersecurity education, mentorship, and networking in local communities. With over 100 chapters globally, there may be one in your area, so you can check out the ISSA.org website for more information on membership options, local chapters, and potential benefits of joining for you today. If you have any questions or concerns around anything, you can always contact us at memberservices@issa.org, and that information is up on the screen for you here today. So here again is entitled the information in the description for today's webinar, the AI agents you didn't know you had. The description of the webinar is up on the slide, but we'll let you take a look at that at your convenience. Would like to tell you that we want to encourage you to ask questions of the speakers today. So to ask a question, you would press the questions button on your screen and type in the question to submit it. We will be monitoring them all throughout the presentation, and we will ask them during the Q&A segment at the end of the presentation. Some of them may be answered in the middle, so just so you know, we will get to your questions. This webinar is being recorded, and the presentation slides are currently available under the attachments button just under your viewing screen. A recording of the webcast will be available on the ISSA Past Web Conferences page and on this ISSA Bright Talk channel soon after the completion of the live broadcast. You also have the opportunity to print a viewing certificate on your Bright Talk profile page that you can then submit for continuing education credits, such as CPEs and CEUs, in accordance with the various certifying bodies. So the link for that is going to also be under the attachments tab. Along with today, we have other supporting documents for this event. That was a mouthful. Now moving on. First, I want to introduce to you guys today's speakers. We have Viet Tran, and he is the Senior Staff Product Manager heading up AI security. Prior to Obsidian, Viet built his product management career in cybersecurity, having worked at Elevate Security and BitSite Technologies. So that is our first speaker today. Joining Viet, we have Tim Gohn, and he is the manager of technical account management at Obsidian Security, where he partners with local global enterprises to secure their most critical enterprise tools. With over 17 years of experience, he's led technical account teams, I should say, at Axonius, CrowdStrike, and Veritas. So with that, I would like to say welcome to both Viet and Tim for joining us today. Guys, are you there?
Yep.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for the introduction, Roxanne. So just to kind of get us teed up, today's agenda will focus on the reasoning and process for moving from observation to governance to enforcement in a way that builds trust with organizations and facilitates the safe and scalable adoption of AI without introducing too much friction into the process. So just to kick things off, I think maybe stating the obvious, AI agents are revolutionizing business. They can perceive signals, they can create plans, and they can act on those plans autonomously at machine speeds. Agents are also flawed in ways that feel a little bit more human than not. They can make mistakes, they can be tricked, and they can simply just be following poorly designed instructions. Combine that with the fact that they can frequently be constructed in ways that are over-permissioned, miss key guardrails, or simply have no auditable accountability. And that creates a situation that disrupts traditional security systems, where the biggest source of vulnerabilities were actually the human identities. According to a Verizon data breach report for 2025, about 60% of all data breaches for that year were actually a result of human error. And now we have agents that are developing more reasoning and planning and proactive action. That all sets us up with, with all that in place, it sets us up with situations where even agents that are not compromised can still lead to instances like, for instance, with Amazon's Kiro agents, where it was originally set up for maintenance tasks but because of a misconfiguration in its permissions, it actually ended up deciding that the best course of action and was able to do so was to actually delete and then try to recreate an entire production environment, which caused a 13-hour outage. And the root cause? Misconfiguration. One simple thing kind of led to a significant downstream impact for many customers and the organization itself. And this setup is something that I think, as we're all pretty sharply aware of, is rapidly scaling going into 2026 and beyond. And the creators of these agents aren't just the security-minded or the technical. They're day-to-day employees without a strong sense of what might be appropriate in terms of the construction of an agent, what might be secure, what might not be sustainable long-term from a security posture perspective for the agents that they're creating. And combine that with the fact that a lot of these agents are likely being created outside of the immediate approval flow and purview of the security team. You can have situations where, for instance, an agent, Copilot Studio agent was connected through an HR admin's credentials to Workday. And that's fine, as long as the agent is being created and used for that HR manager's day-to-day consumption, just report and generation flow. But we've actually seen where that exact situation, a few months later, that agent becomes more widely shared across that same organization. And it could have led to an incident where a non HR admin could have pulled executive compensation or made changes to another employee's compensation. Thankfully, I think with continuous programs, we are able to follow up on those particular misconfigurations and get ahead of those potential incidents as a continuous governance program is deployed. Agents don't have potentially static behavior, and the configuration changes, even small configuration changes, could allow them to be much more "quote unquote" helpful than they were originally created to be. And the other aspect, I think, of observation and governance is not just getting yourself a list of all the agents that are being deployed across your organization. It's having a tool stack that can stitch together data from across multiple systems, from the agents where they're being created, edited, and deployed, stitching that with the data that you might have around the SaaS applications and critical systems that those agents have access to, where a lot of permissions and other sensitive data is stored. Really helping build a full picture that individual or standalone solutions may not be able to directly address. And so this poll here too, we're pulling up. Roxanne, are we good to trigger the poll?
Yep, we just kicked it off.
Awesome. I'll talk a little bit about this as well, because I think for a lot of organizations, just getting started with the inventory piece is quite daunting of a task, because you're likely operating across multiple AI platforms. And the last slide, you're likely looking to stitch that data across multiple types of systems to really get yourself that full picture of not only what agents exist, but what can they do, what access do they have, and what can they do with that access that might be a material consequence for your organization. And I think we're all sort of discovering and learning, AI security as it evolves, especially because it seems to change, from week to week. So I think organizations often find themselves on some part of the maturity curve when it comes to understanding and then governing their AI agents. I'll actually pause here a little bit.
We do have some responses here, Viet. So, yeah. It looks like the one in the lead is, it's changing as people join, but it looks like the lead is looking like number 1. We have no inventory of AI agents yet. That's running about 47%. The second one, well, for second place, it's a little tight between number 5 and number 2.
Yeah, and I think that response lines up with kind of where we're seeing a lot of customers that we've engaged with are starting their journey. It really felt like, beginning of this year, people were starting to talk about this, but then as every month progressed, it became more and more pressing. And so I think everybody is out there looking for a potential solution set that can help them bridge not only the initial inventory of agents, but sort of the broader, visibility, like what sort of access do they have, what systems do they impact, and I do think, making sure that you start. Tim's going to talk about this in a little bit from his perspective, working with customers, but I think just getting started and just trying to understand, what AI platforms are, the approved ones in my organization. Even the approved AI platforms, nobody really has like a full stack of where all the agents that are running and being deployed across those environments. So that's a great place to start as well. Yeah, it's great to respond. I think great engagement responses here.
And I think just from a contextual standpoint as well, for those folks responding, we don't currently have an inventory yet, and we're still assessing it. You're in good hands, right? This is in good company, I suppose. This is one of the things that we see across the entire customer base, is that we have a lot of folks that are starting from the place where I don't know, very plainly, and that's scary for everyone here in cybersecurity. As we continue talking a little bit about this poll in specific, we'll talk about how we've been operationalizing this with some of our customers, but then also following some of the same patterns that we as cybersecurity professionals have done for years and years and years.
I think we're good to move on to the next slide. You want to take over, Tim?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and howdy, y'all. Thanks so much for the responses to the polls. My name's Tim Gohn. I've been for my career a technical account manager in one capacity or another in cybersecurity. And one of the things that AI brings to mind is the same sort of things that for us that have been around for a little while now, the same sort of plays that you've seen from BYOD to understanding asset management, to understanding workload management. A lot of these are going to follow the same patterns. It's very similar to things like threats or misconfigurations within your environments follow many of the same patterns as CVEs. I always think that's a great way to start thinking about this. This isn't necessarily something brand new to us. We've seen these types of endpoints before. We know what adversaries are actively trying to do to us. And so how do we stop them? How do we prevent this from happening? Well, the answer in short, and this is obviously coming from me in technical account management, is always disciplined action, disciplined thought, and constant reassessing, utilizing the OODA loop that many of us learned years and years ago to really observe, orient, decide, and then ultimately act on the AI agents that exist within our business. So within this part, so now and Viet, thank you so much. Now that we understand really what's happening and we've kind of anchored ourselves, so we've observed and oriented, we have to start to decide like what we're going to do with some of these applications or these AI agents that we're working with. What we'd like to start with is not only that poll kind of anchoring you as to where you are in your journey along AI security, but understanding some of the other issues that exist within similar peer organizations. So I always like to start with a story. AI agents, look, they aren't necessarily something that you have control over as a security practitioner. Like many other software that's deployed inside of our environments, these are things that are pushed onto us. And so it's our job to make sure that we're keeping the bad guys out and letting the good guys into the organization. So the case study that we kind of want to talk about here is a large organization with over $5 billion in revenue and 14,000 employees. What they did was immediately deploy a Copilot. Now, the challenge with this is that Copilot was a business imperative that was pushed onto the organization. And ultimately, security struggled because they didn't have immediate control. This was an application that they were downstream of and trying to play a game of whack-a-mole. So when they really understood this, they had to understand what was happening in their environment, the types of roles, permissions, and access that an individual agent ran, and then ultimately what was it doing. My job as a TAM is make sure that we're delivering outcomes for the product. So all the great stuff that Viet and his team build, we are making sure that they're actually getting traction inside your environment and getting you real outcomes. The first thing is understand what potentially is your attack surface. And then because they're not somebody that necessarily owns the tool themselves, context is king with everything. We're not going to stop agentic AI. AI in general, we're not going to stop it within businesses. We understand this. This is imperative that the business organizations are pushing onto us. And that's something that we also want as part of these growing organizations. This is where the future is going. So we have to be able to contextualize risk, right? I don't have a problem with AI. I don't have a problem with rogue assets necessarily. Like, oh, rogue is probably the problem. But I have a problem with a lack of security controls within them. And I have a problem contextually as to what exactly is happening. So what we did with this organization was we first understood the agents that were exist in their environment, got a real context in the layout. And then ultimately, we were able to take that to the business owners, the people that were running this, that were owning this product in general, and ultimately take that to a place where they had the ability to understand the risk from a business sense, not from a us standpoint. A lot of this is great. You know, we have those CISSP credits, things that we're working on. That is highly contextual, and it's preaching to the choir when you're talking to security professionals. Take that to someone in sales. Take that to somebody in other departments that might not really understand security. Context will always be king. So really what we're going to talk about as we're building up an operational cadence here is the 3-step process we have to really developing that cadence and that context that you need. And what we really like to do is break it down into 3 levels. So for those that are really starting their journey in agentic AI security and really trying to assess where they're at, my general recommendation and our recommendation across the board is really taking these 3 steps. Now, this isn't the context itself, but this is gathering the information that you need to make critical moves and critical securing changes within your organization. So step 1 is find all the agents. We have to understand the scope and scale. Continuous discovery. So you have to not only understand where you're at today, but like a newspaper, as soon as you pull out those reports, it is old the moment it's printed. So you have to have a continuously operating inventory of all agents across all platforms. And that's going to be the sticky wicket that goes on with most of our customers, is that they have not one AI agent platform, but many. So how do you control all of those when they're through disparate teams? Well, the first and biggest step is really kind of getting an understanding of what those agents are. Who are they? You know, who owns them? That sort of initial question. The second step is really coming into the governance standpoint, which is understanding what are they doing? Should they exist? What sort of permissions do they have? What could they do is really our second step. And that's ultimately defining our attack surface. And then finally, when they run, what are they doing? So it's who are they? What could they do? And then very critically, what are they doing? Those are the items that we've defined really to help define context and drive within our understanding of what's happening with agentic AI security in your org. So let's kind of break down each one of these, and then we'll talk about how you can translate this into business success here at the end. So first and critical step is understanding agents operating in your environment. The great thing about agentic AI is, and this is part of its sell to us as the world, is that they're going to connect to other platforms, meaning that there will be integrations to agentic AI solutions across your enterprise, primarily to things like your critical business tools. More on that later. That gets scary. But from our standpoint is understanding all the agents. there are breadcrumbs. This isn't something that starts from scratch. You will be able to understand this if you look and inspect your tools specifically. So really understanding what platforms exist, what's the breakdown between those two? Are they agentic platforms? Are they cloud managed agents, like AWS Bedrock? Or are they something separate, like Copilot? Those are things that we really want to understand. You have to move past the static list. The challenge with agentic AI is, as Viet mentioned before, was they are non-deterministic. So when we have these types of tools, the best way to really think about these is that they are non-human identities. They are non-human security gaps that exist within your, or automated agents within your environment. These are folks that like hiring or promotions or other people that are brought into your organization. It's ephemeral. It continues to change up and down. Making sure that you have that continuous monitoring is the first and most critical step, right? You don't know what you don't know. But one of the things to really take a look at and think about within your environment is what sort of breadcrumbs and what other tools are they connected to. For an old example of this might be things like, yes, you might have other agentic AI environments running in your environment, but if they're not connected to anything, that does significantly lower our risk, right? We think about beachheads, privilege escalations, maintenance of access, privilege escalation, lateral movement, the types of things that adversaries want to do inside your environment, leading up to destruction or exfiltration of information. Understanding those critical components, the whole attack surface that exists, is going to be the critical first step. Okay, so now that you understand all the agents that exist within your environment, what can they do? That's the critical step. Again, going back to our example earlier, the thing that was a real challenge for not only this customer, but the vast majority of customers that we work with is that they don't own this tool, and the people that are generating agents aren't necessarily somebody that has a deep and rich security mindset, meaning that they're often overly permissive. Maker mode privileges, specifically for that example within Microsoft Copilot, mean that that person that has granted this agent the ability to do everything they can do. That gets really scary really quickly, right? Now, that might be great for certain subsets, and that might be a real specific thing, but us as security practitioners, we're granting these people access rights. We're giving them these tools because we're thinking about them as a person. We aren't thinking about them necessarily as a fleet of agents that person is going to create. So really understanding not only what that person needs individually, but then understanding what those agents that might have these inherited level permissions across the board is going to be your critical next step. After we understand what the agents are, what could they do? This is where we're going to start to talk about things like unused access, right? So things like, a vestigial agent is a dangerous agent. They still exist inside your environment. They're unused. However, they're there, right? They could be used by an adversary or someone with malicious intent. The next thing is, can we downscope those roles? I, like many folks on this call, will have elevated permissions for a number of different things, meaning that we are prime targets for adversaries, specifically nation state actors that want to breach us, right? This is why we get those yearly security trainings ourselves, and we really pay close attention to things like phishing attempts. Understanding that the agents that I have created may have my level of permissions means that we really need to understand not only what those agents can do, but what can we downscope them to. Now, finally, getting rid of agents is a big thing. We have granted a person these permissions, and we haven't necessarily thought about this as granting that agent those level of permissions. So as we explore this as a concept, what we really should be thinking about is, just because I shut down an agent doesn't mean that is impacting a person's job or livelihood, right? So in those cases, we should be thinking about agentic AI not as long-lived software replacements, but as ephemeral workloads that are helping us do our job a little bit better. So that's the next iterative step. So understand your agents, understand the breadcrumb that exists with them. Then we moved into what could they do? Should they exist? Are they being used? And should we start thinking about a time period or an expiry that should exist within these agents? Those are the immediate next steps. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. The next and most critical component, and this comes into those, so EDR, EPP endpoints. This happened. This is the thing that's happening in your environment. This moves out of the preparation phase and into the immediate phase. This is often the area that you're going to be looking at because this is no longer academic. This isn't, and many times as we're presenting inside of security, people can think that we're using scare tactics, and that's always a challenge within this across the board. Runtime is not. This is empirical. This has happened inside of your environment. So really understanding what each one of those agents is doing within runtime is the critical step. This is the rubber meets the road moment for you and your organization. So first is really set policies around what those folks should be able to do, right? Should I grant a permission to an agent to go in and start to pull all HR information, including salary and social security information, and then allow that agent to start emailing out? Probably not. There could be use cases in those cases, but sure. But there is always this sort of risky behavior where we need to start thinking about downscoping what those agents are doing and permitted to doing. Understanding runtime, the things that are happening in your environment, allows you to see that context. Now, obviously, we're going to want to block high risk and rare events. I work under the premise that the folks that work inside of our organizations are not malicious with their intent. Your coworkers, the people that you see on a day-to-day, getting a cup of coffee, aren't trying to do bad things, but they have the likelihood, like in phishing attempts, to do things that would negatively impact the company. So these would be starting to block high risk or rare events. So things that are risky, like accessing HR, or things like prompt level security, where those individuals are entering in specific types of data, things like PII specifically that we want to really understand, really want to start to block. And then finally, how often are these things happening, right? So we have a policy, we're blocking the rare and the risky. But then what is happening on a more frequent basis? These three steps really start to allow you to build context within your business. Again, the thing to think about as you follow the journey, understanding all the agents existing within your business, understanding what they could do, and then understanding what they are doing. Really is the ways that we start to build context and start building business cases for you to get to the point where you're defining and continually improving your policies. Okay, so that's going to bring us to our next poll, and we'll start talking about this just a little bit. But Roxanne, if we can launch that would be wonderful. But I really want to understand, what's your biggest security challenge right now as it relates to AI? One, are you getting a complete picture of all the agents in your environment? Two, understanding the full scope of what agents can access. Three, we don't have the tooling to enforce this, and that does happen for sure. Four is making a business case to act on what we find, and then five is really defining the policy. So the poll should be open right now, and your responses are always appreciated within this. But I'd really love to understand a little bit more about this. As you start thinking about this, right? And this does remind me of a decade ago when we were talking about, what is the next generation of antivirus that exists? What does this mean? What does endpoint detection and response mean to us, and how do we operationalize this within our business? Are we blocking the bad? Are we letting the good go through? Really, as we start to think about this, and as many of you know, isn't a binary like that. It's not. Adversaries want this to happen. They want it to become a game of whack-a-mole. Our discipline in thought, our discipline in action, and our ability to really start to work on this really helps us and really helps us improve things across the board. Roxanne, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of challenges going back to the list. I have it right here. So we're across the board. So we're talking about defining policies, being the lead, and figuring out where to start. I think we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And then the second component here is really understanding every agent inside your environment. So getting us off and going. We'll let this go for just a couple more seconds. But one of the things to think about as you're going about this, and especially with our lead and starting to define a policy, what we like to do is understand what is the business trying to accomplish. My goal as a TAM across my 17 years, right, is we built these products, we built these tools, and we want you to do the things that you want it to do. But at a higher level, how do we impact your business through security operations? That's to elevate your own stance in the company. That's always great from a resume standpoint. But more importantly, for our perspective is, are we supporting your business? Are we supporting your mission overall? Whether that's a public or private entity, a nonprofit entity. What ultimately is your mission, and how are our asks, changes, and controls contributing to or negating from that mission? We, of course, don't want to be the Department of No. That's so often the things that happen from cybersecurity standpoint. But the biggest thing that we really recommend across the board when we're starting to define a policy is start with, what does the business do? Like as simple as that might sound, understanding what the business does and really whether this is helping or hurting the business. Now, in those instances, when you're starting to define policies, being upfront very critically about the risk that is being posed, but then we're not able to run as fast with agentic AI in this particular case because of the potential risk to reputation, and that's really what this comes through. Is we have a potential risk to reputation as our organization, and we want the people that are relying on us to continue to trust us. That's an imperative across the board. So thank you so much for this. We really appreciate this. It looks like it's pretty good distribution across the board. About a third of y'all have a challenge defining the policy and figuring out where to start. About a quarter from there is getting a complete picture of everything in your environment. And then it's spread between the three, between 10 and 13%, where you're seeing 2 through 4 being some of the challenges. Great. So let's talk about how we're going to start defining a little bit more here. So the 3 questions and recommendations for the near term we are going to recommend is get a hold of your inventory, follow those breadcrumbs that exist, right? You'll know the types of things that exist inside your environment. If you don't have tooling that necessarily does this out of the box, understanding things like what is purchased, but through procurement, right? Things like that. And then also what is connecting to your system, what sort of tokens, access, and transfers are happening between these tools, because that is the power of AI and the specific use of agentic AI, right? Next, really understand a little bit about the score and monitoring of agent access. What should they be doing? What are those things that are verboten inside of your environment? For example, agents should not touch our Salesforce instance. Agents should not touch our Workday instance. Those are things that you need to start thinking about. And as we understand our inventory and the ways to follow those, what shouldn't an AI agent talk about? And again, contextualize that within the business itself, right? Sales is the lifeblood of every private organization. So how do we make sure that we're not interrupting those flows? We have significant regulatory concerns over certain things like PII. Those are things that we shouldn't touch. So really understanding what those agents are touching. And the great thing about that is that if you're following a breadcrumb through things that are connected into your environment, you're immediately going to be able to start seeing the tools that they're touching. That's the components there, right? Not every team can do every job and automate away every component of their workloads with agentic AI. And that's because it's a system, right? It doesn't necessarily have the company's best interest in mind. It has the interest in running the job it's told to do. Viet mentioned that a little bit earlier, where we've all seen the news where an entire database is getting wiped out. Not things that we want running, right? So these are the crown jewels inside your environment. So understanding the crown jewels, like the things that you have to secure the most, and then being extremely cautious with those things that touch that is the next iterative step. And then as you mature your journey, and especially for this audience, as we're talking about organizations that have a challenge understanding not only the policy, but then also, what agents exist inside of our environment, is what should these agents be doing? Now, we've understood what systems they shouldn't touch, and that's certainly going to downscope our overarching risk. But after that, like, how do we start with unauthorized access to systems? How do we start with long-running agents and we start to pull them? How do we talk about overly permissive things? And, as we mentioned before, in the case of Copilot, these maker mode permissions are a really great component to look at. At Obsidian, we call these things toxic combinations. There's a number of critical toxic combinations that exist that you need visibility into. Things that are accessing a lot of different stuff, that are running frequently, that have the access of security or IT director. Those are the components that we're seeing. Watching the runs that exist inside customers' environments really opens your eyes as to what can and cannot be pruned. And that is really how we start to define process, with the overarching recommendation being support your business. Make sure that the business understands the different components and things that you need to work towards to really ultimately make sure that things are aligned to the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve overall. And with that, we'll leave any questions. I'll end with just this kind of general parting thought as we're building context. The number of agents is going to help you define the number of challenges that you have within your business. Right? Is this a big problem or is it a small problem? I have a dozen agents, or do I have 1,500 agents? Those are two different challenges to control. I could probably watch a dozen agents. 1,500, I can't. 10,000, I can't. Those are things that we see. We see hundreds of thousands of agents that exist inside of the customer's environments, and that really causes the challenges where you just don't know where to start. But by understanding where those agents are, know that you started the path to go through there. Then separating out those different components that really understand what they could do. Finally, moving into runtime risk. That is the context that you can take back to the business and say, we don't have a problem with these agents. We love that we're using these agents. This is the contextual problem we have. Here's our recommendations to fix it. And with that, I would open up to any questions we might have.
This is Roxanne. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So one of the things that came up as you were discussing is that, this is really something pretty challenging for security teams. And when you guys are talking to security teams who are just starting to get their arms around this, what's the thing that surprises them the most once they start looking at what their agents are doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a great question. It's their permissions. It's the amount of things that are just running through environments. I think that we think of AI agents not necessarily as peers from a risk standpoint. The biggest surprise that we've seen is those types of toxic combinations existing inside of our environments. So I would say the thing that always is the shock, the jaw drop kind of moment. And I had this as a direct example, is where an environment we were working with had somebody that had maker mode privileges. Again, another Copilot story. But they had these granted permissions, and the agent was publicly accessible, meaning that any question I might possibly want to ask of you, the owner of these permissions, I can ask the agent without that level of scrutiny that a person would actually put on this, right? So if we were, these are the easiest phishing that exists in the world, because I don't have to act or interact with a person. I can start to just get the information I need. That level of reconnaissance and that potential risk is the thing that really drops everyone's jaw. It does get scary, right? But really, it's the combination of the risk factors that opens up most folks' eyes. Hopefully,
Okay.
that's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, I could, okay, so it seems like Viet has a question here that he answered, that was typed in. So Viet, if you want to step up and talk and tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah,
From your perspective.
the question was around, what are the best ways to look for agents in your environment? And I think if we're just starting off, where we see a lot of our customers start is they will engage with their, I know that some teams are distributed, so application owners are separate from the security team. So what some of our customers have done is they've identified, all right, which are the AI platforms that are being leveraged across, my organization, my ecosystem. And usually we see, anywhere from, on the average, 2 to 4 AI platforms. So that might include Copilot Studio, that might include, AWS Bedrock Agent Core, and then maybe, N8N or, Agentforce, right? And once they have a grasp of which of those platforms, at least the known ones that are being operated on and, agents are actively being deployed, then you can connect to those. They typically have APIs that will provide and expose the agent metadata, and so that kind of starts tackling and chipping away at the whole, what agents are out there that are in production that my employees or my staff have created and actually released out into the wild to help them drive their day-to-day workflows. Obsidian, just as a company reference, we do have our AI security solution, which has pre-built connectors across multiple AI platforms. And that's typically kind of how we help our customers start their journey. In terms of, discovering which AI platforms or which AI solutions or SaaS applications with AI, it seems like every, company is building out their own set of AI features and AI agents. Another type of solution that we do offer as well is around the browser extension that gives you a much sort of broader view as to where potentially are employees using AI features or agent builder flows, not necessarily like the granular details of which agents, what are they able to do, but that'll give you a general sense of are there any critical platforms that haven't been surfaced up to me, and then you can route back to the initial phase of ensuring that the agent metadata and what those agents have access to is ingested back into your single pane of glass. And that's really one of the sort of key starting points, is that sort of like continuous loop. And it's something that Tim mentioned is not just getting a list of agents, but also pulling in log data and permission data from SaaS applications, from your IDP, to really help layer on top of those AI agents the access they have and the risks that they present to your organization. So that I think if you just look to like get a list of agents, it can get overwhelming pretty fast if your organization is quickly evolving in its maturity of AI adoption. So one thing that we do often recommend is not just getting a list, but helping your teams by identifying specific risks or toxic combinations that you'd want to look for. Maybe that agent is accessing sensitive data and is shared across too many people in the organization, as an example. And that'll help you prioritize down what will likely be a very quickly growing and evolving list.
Great job, Viet. I appreciate that. While we're answering these questions, I will slide back to this other slide because I think that this is always useful for people to see. We do have another question that's come in from Jim in Wyoming. Very interesting question. Like dark IT, I worry about dark AI, where employees bring their own AI to work. Any thoughts on that lightning rod topic?
Yeah,
who wants to answer
it
that
scares me
question?
too, Jim. Yeah, like you're in that's 100%. Yeah, I think that, as Viet mentioned, right? So I think that there can be a couple different ways to think about this, right? So understanding what's running on the individual workspace, so understanding the workload, things that are really monitoring what that agent's getting connected to. The question really needs to come into contextualization, I suppose, within this case, which is there a potential risk of that going further, right? And that really starts to ask kind of the critical questions, right? Like, so how many agents are we talking about? What could they do? And then what is running within them? If they exist, you're not going to be able to tell what's going on individually until you have deep understanding of that. I think this is happening across the board, where people will bring in their own flavor of AI. Everybody's having a super fun time until they exfiltrate some data. It's not an oopsies. So the risk within this, right, is understanding what's happening inside your environment at a higher level. Often these are, log monitoring. These are things that are connected to your environments. What's happening in some sort of way from a web traffic or proxy information that's being transferred out. That goes back into the kind of capture process and the continuous capture process that exists within your environment. But yeah, tooling that captures not only shadow SaaS, but also shadow AI is always the easy button in these types of scenarios. Other ways to go about that is going to be really understanding what potentially could get connected to, and where from a logging standpoint are my employees going to, specifically on company owned devices, right? I have my own fun little AI agent lab going in another room. That's on my own personal laptop. You'd pick up that laptop and art cache. Aside from that, you're not really going to worry about that as an organization. What we're really concerned about is monitoring the workloads that we are responsible for, what systems and tools we're responsible for, what's connecting to them, and what's running on or around those systems. It's not really a great answer. It is something to be constantly vigilant of, but it is the exact same issue, right? Understanding what's happening and getting the tooling around that that allows you to capture that sort of information ultimately is going to help you go to sleep at night. I don't always go to sleep. Sorry, if you had any items.
Yeah, I'll take this on a more tactical level. Tim probably good high level approach to it. Tactically, there are solutions. Again, just to speak a little bit about Obsidian, we do have the ability to detect if someone, through our browser extension, if someone's logged into their personal ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or even potentially their own Copilot instances. And that does help with just identifying, like, is someone potentially sending sensitive company information to a personal chatbot account or whatever what you might have you. The other tactical piece, just from a broader business perspective, we do see a lot of organizations starting to adopt a headless approach, meaning they'll expose a lot of their tools and capabilities through a official MCP server. And so there is some work that is being done to essentially identify when there are AI services accessing critical SaaS applications, through those MCP servers, and identifying when potentially identities or permissions are being piloted by potentially unknown AI services. That'll help kind of get started in terms of, to our topic today, like the visibility piece, so that you can then start governance. Like, is that identity, or access, unexpectedly being piloted by an AI service that you might not have approved? Those two pieces there, I think, are kind of two angles from which you can kind of tackle that piece. And then, it does seem like a lot of organizations are more and more exposing their applications through AI native capabilities like MCP servers and what and the like. So I think from a high level, my focus on the answer is around not just are they using shadow AI or are they using their own flavor of AI? But more critically, like what is that connected to? Because that's kind of where the business impact is going to be seen, as they're able to kind of pull down data from critical systems, and potentially now they're storing critical data on, on their local device or within a unknown AI service. That's where some unintended data exposure could happen, and that's part of why, like for me at least, and kind of to talk to Tim's point, focusing on their access into critical systems, and trying to identify those potential instances and looking to start that visibility so we can then do governance. That does provide, I think, the most leverage. I think if we're trying to tackle the entire sort of shadow AI problem, it is quite overwhelming. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, it is. We can probably talk about that for hours and hours, though, across the board. But yeah, just last bit there, tier your applications, like business critical, sub 0, 1, 2, all the way out. That's also going to help you limit when we're talking about systems that are talking to other systems, right? So agentic AI that's talking to you, or as on a broader scope, when you start thinking about shadow SaaS or supply chain risk, those are things that really are going to help you from an organizational standpoint. What are our crown jewels? 0. What are our very important things? 1, and then move out to nice to have tools, right? The things that are making life easier, the stuff that we ordered lunch with at the office, those type of things. Not to disparage those, but they're we could walk to lunch if needs be, but having that and then understanding what's talking to them, that's certainly going to help.
Very good, very good. We do have a question here from George, who says, do open source agents or AI platforms present different or more serious challenges?
I think they do present some different challenges as well, because when you start thinking about open source, agent framework or harnesses, or open source like models, then you start getting into some pretty hairy questions around supply chain risk for those. Are you potentially using an open source like model that has potentially been corrupted or poisoned? Has there been some issue that's been introduced to it across the supply chain? We have seen some organizations use these sort of open source models from like a cost reduction perspective, but they often try to make sure that those are appropriately contained and sandboxed across the organization. And there's often a pretty rigorous review process, especially if you're talking about like open source, like agent harnesses. Do you have a full understanding of its bill of materials? Do you have a full understanding of versioning? Do you have a full understanding of what the use case is? Because it does introduce like a different set of, or a more, I think sometimes a more serious set of challenges when you incorporate in those like open source agent harnesses and LLMs.
That goes back into Jim's question too, right? About shadow, right? That goes in. That's oftentimes go hand in hand. I always go back to the open source is great, right? But it also does, to Viet's point, expose a number of critical issues inside your environment. Because it isn't necessarily updated and it's on you to do that. Really the same hygiene problem that you exist where you have, vestigial agents or overly permissive agents exists as a multiplier with those open source type of platforms.
Yeah, if there was a second follow-up to that question that he sent, saying that many corporate leaders find open source models as attractive cost reduction opportunities, which is one of the things that was mentioned. So how should cyber staff frame the risk profile? Do you think you guys already answered that, or?
I think maybe. I mean, like maybe the short answer is if you don't pay for a product, you are the product. Might be the the short one on that one. But yeah, no, I think it's the understanding of the compounded issues, right? So how do you contextualize this? We're compounding our issues, because instead of wondering about these certain subsets of agents, we're now worried about this harness that is also version controlled, potentially exfiltrating or exposing other data. There's a lot of other additional tech debt that exists here from a vetting standpoint. So I think the critical component here is that open source is great. There are hidden costs that we're not contributing right now. And if the ultimate business goal of AI is to make us more efficient, this, buyer beware in those cases, it doesn't necessarily accomplish the overarching goal when you have significantly more overhead to manage that. So that's how we would contextualize it, is like, you could, right, from a time saving standpoint. But if we're saying that, we're saving the business all this time and efficiency, we're losing it here. And so there's, ultimately in some cases, and that's not every case, by the way, there's great use cases, as Viet mentioned. There's really good and impactful use cases. You have to be thorough about looking at this here, but you just don't want to get into a robbing from Peter to pay Paul scenario. Do we have any other questions too? If you have other questions, I think both on LinkedIn.
Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry, Tim. No, I was talking and I was on mute.
I do that more than once.
Thank you. So I was saying we have a few minutes left. There is one question, if you guys could answer it just pretty quickly, because I thought this was pretty interesting. What happens to an AI agent when the employee who built it leaves the company?
Ooh.
We've seen that a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, we do. That person might have left, but your agent continues on. And oftentimes at the same level of permissions. Yet, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can take a sort of first crack at it. I've seen. Yeah, you've probably seen it out in the wild. That does. We've seen that actually quite a bit. And some organizations have implemented runtime enforcement controls. So these, runtime enforcement can be done in a variety of different ways. Some platforms facilitate them a little bit better than others. Copilot Studio, for instance, security webhook. There's a security webhook that you can have a threat provider sit on top of and allow you to create very customized and targeted per environment runtime security policies. And something that some organizations have talked to us about is essentially creating a runtime policy that says, if the risk for this agent is that it does not have an owner or its original creator on deck to be accountable, then it just doesn't get to run. Because if something goes wrong, if that agent is modified to, say, have access to a Salesforce or to a Notion, and then something goes wrong, and then there is data that is exposed either organization-wide or publicly that should not have been, now you're kind of stuck in that situation where, before you always have a human to hold accountable. But in this case, there is no owner, there is no creator. It was just a part of your system, it's an asset in your system that is a sort of machine insider, essentially. And I think when an incident happens, I think a lot of organizations want to avoid a situation where the buck stops at them in terms of just an accountability perspective, because there's nobody else to hold accountable if something does go wrong with a orphaned agent. From a hygiene perspective, either reassigning that agent to a new owner is often a good enough, as long as if the justification for the agent continuing to run is good. If not, this is kind of a great opportunity for the security team to come in and just kind of, essentially say, there is no owner. There's not a clear use case for this agent. Let's reduce our attack surface.
Yep. And very tactically too, and this is one of the things that I think about too, as employees are come in and then, ultimately leave my organizations. This is also an IT problem, right? And this goes about provisioning, right? So, what are your deprovisioning rules for an employee? Because ultimately these agents will be hooking into the permission sets or birthright roles that that individual person used. So also reviewing as part of this your policy for deprovisioning people because that's ultimately where this is going to start, is, understanding not only those runtime and Viet's spot on. That is the exact way to do this. Another critical way to think about this as you start to mature your journey is, can I just look at the deprovisioning access and then look at that with an overlap of what my critical applications are? Oftentimes Workday is going to be, or HRM systems are going to be publicly exposed because former employees need their tax information for one reason or another. So really understanding those nuances are going to help you get a better control overall.
So you guys, we're at the top of the hour, but we did get a last minute question that popped in, and we might be able to fire around this one pretty quickly. Who's responsible when an AI system makes an incorrect or harmful decision?
It's a big question.
That's a big question, yeah.
It's a big question. I'll take a first crack at it.
Yeah.
It's kind of varied, I think, across the type and size of the organizations that Tim and I have engaged with.
Mm-hmm.
I think when there are agent creators and owners that and that you have a system of record for who created this agent and who currently owns it, which might be two different things. But when you do have that record, I think that's obviously like the best for everybody, because when it comes to who do you hold accountable if it makes an error or mistake, well, I think it goes back to the governance question that Tim brought up earlier around, agents are essentially, they're overly helpful. They're essentially little machine insiders in that they don't have any sense of morality or sense of security sense, as it were.
Yeah.
And they're very geared in to meet the goals that they've been set to meet. And so honestly, the best way to ensure nothing critically destructive happens is that they are appropriately scoped for the task that they're set to do. So they're not reaching outside of their, file path. They're not able to use, services or permissions that they really shouldn't be able to. And that sort of is like a step one. But when you do get to like that set of mistakes, if you do have a creator or agent owner, I think a chunk of the organizations I've worked with often, go back to them in terms of like an incident fund, and essentially kind of ask the questions starting there. I think it gets really hairy when you don't have a record, a system of record for understanding who created and owns the agent. And then that sort of kind of goes into this rabbit hole of, is security. This has kind of been a tough problem for some of our security teams because it feels like they are being held accountable for a system that they were not really involved or invited to the table to set up. And so, that system of record of like who created the agent, who owns it, even if it's just like a team, I think that's super important. And I'll pass it over to him.
And from a business standpoint, I think I make every one of my teams, which is I'm sure annoying for them, but read the book Extreme Ownership. So the answer in short is me, you. That's the gist. Is that I think that who's responsible, and we have to divorce blame from this. Responsibility and blame are two different things, right? We have a problem. We collectively, as an organization, have a problem. So I, really taking that on individually and bringing that into a business, but then at the same time divorcing that from blame, right? Or punitive actions. It's not going to change the tire. Like, we have a flat tire here. Change the tire. How we got a flat tire is currently irrelevant to the fact that we cannot drive. Change the tire, and we'll figure out why we got that tire to flat in the first place and prevent that moving forward. So I think that it starts with us. It starts with us taking that responsibility and then actioning that critically for the rest of the organization. It doesn't feel good for sure, but change and improvement never does.
That's a really good point, Timothy. I like the separation of blame from the situation, right? You're right. You got a flat tire, you got to deal with it. Let's focus on that, and then we'll handle everything else later. So with that, we are a few minutes over. So what we will do is we will go ahead and close up. Let me go ahead and get started on that by saying, I want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us today. So as a reminder, Today's event has been recorded and the presentation slides are available. To access the recording, you visit the ISSA Past Web Conferences page or the ISSA Bright Talk channel, where you can also subscribe to receive updates on any future webinars. Again, there is a link under the Attachments tab, which you can access to print a viewing certificate that you can submit for continuing education credits, along with other supporting documents for this event, including the slide deck. If you have any questions about anything you've seen today, please contact us at memberservices@issa.org. And lastly, again, very interesting, slightly scary, but very interesting conversation. Thank you to Viet and Timothy for being here today. And thank you all for joining us. So everyone, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
Yes.
Guys, appreciate it.
Thank
Bye.
you.